Bootstrap. It's incredible what you can think of and come up with limited resources. Giving away equity, bringing in a partner too soon. I find that these create more problems than they solve. And getting outside funding, borrowing heavily to launch a business, I think is a mistake. Scaling it down to the point that you control it, you don't owe anyone anything, makes you very resourceful and creative. And I think ultimately you'll grow the business faster and bigger that way. So running lean, keep all expenses variable, use contractors, not employees, and delay, in fact, avoid partners if you can.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur who's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. You ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Dan Bauer. Dan was going back to high school, knew that or what he wanted to do in high school, which was he wanted to go into advertising. So had a passion for writing. So he went to Ohio University and got a communications and advertising degree. And he worked for a firm for about 4 years, then went to work for another firm in Hawaii and did that for about 13 years. And then during that time, I think, moved to the financial advertising and business side as well. And then came to the realization that he needed a bit more experience in numbers and on the business side. So he went and got an MBA at Harvard Business School. Then took some senior marketing roles at Citibank and MasterCard. And then they wanted him to relocate. And he said, I don't want to relocate. And so he decided that at that point he'd become an entrepreneur, maybe an engineer as well, but entrepreneur, and tried to initially launch a mini MBA program, found out that that's not necessarily what people were willing to pay for or were looking for. So pivoted to more of a career consulting or career path consulting business, and launched that, been doing it for 20 years. Then an employee offered to buy out the business from him. So he sold that in about 2016 and remained on for an advisory role for a bit of time, launched a marketing and communications practice after that, wanted to pay it forward. So has also been focusing on doing a couple things with entrepreneurship forums and also doing some entrepreneurship camps for high school kids. So with that much as introduction, welcome on the podcast, Dan.
Thanks so much, Devin. I appreciate it. It's funny to hear one's own life compacted into 60 seconds.
Exactly. But, kind of like that, at the end when you die and you see the life flash before your eyes, and you're like, that's everything that I did. That's interesting. No, I think it's a great journey, and I kind of ran through it in a much quicker fashion. So why don't we unpack it a bit? And so tell us kind of how things got started in high school for you, and how you always knew you wanted to go into advertising, which I'll say is not necessarily the typical thing that high schoolers are thinking about going into. So tell us how your journey got started there.
Well, early on, I realized that words were my friends more than numbers. And so writing and framing ideas, creating was really my thing. And I enjoyed that a lot. And was exposed to my best friend's uncle ran an ad agency where I was growing up in Cleveland, and went to visit him. And I just saw it and felt the vibe of that place. And I said, this is where I need to be. And so that's what attracted me to the agency business. My writing ability and planning ability served me very well there, and it was a great run. This was a different ad world, though. This was more the Mad Men era, and the word digital was not in existence at that point. So I grew out of that, decided the client side would be a little more interesting, and at that point I had found myself in Hawaii, where I'd been recruited by an agency.
Now, you just jumped over like 20 years of time. So we're going to jump back just a little bit to dive in. So coming out of high school, you went to Ohio State University, or Ohio
University.
I said, as soon as I said, I'm like, wait, it's not Ohio State, but Ohio University. And you got your communications and advertising degree, which makes sense. You know, you liked
Yes.
advertising, you liked writing, saying numbers aren't my strong suit, or at least not my passion. And so then you come out of school and you worked for a firm for about 4 years. Is that right?
Yes, an agency in Pittsburgh called Ketchum, McLeod and Grove.
Hmm.
I started as at the bottom of the ladder. My office was literally a broom closet that they took the brooms out and put a small desk in there. And I just hunkered down and said, I'm going to learn and I'm going to, perform and make my mark here. One day,
So
my
now
boss
and
came.
then you did that. So no, and the ironic thing is, so I have my son, which is now not quite a college university graduate, a bit different, but he works on one of the very small family businesses. And we basically did the same thing. We had a small kind of closet, said, okay, he doesn't need a lot of room. He's pretty small, and he'll just be excited he has his own little office. So we set that up. So so maybe that will be his, or circling back after he comes to college, he'll have to take back over the same office. But no, you did that for 4 years and say, okay, you got some great experience, kind of worked your way up a bit, started from the broom closet. Now, how did you, at the end of the 4 years, say, now I'm going to go to Hawaii? It sounds like a great place to go. I'm not disagreeing that it would be a fun trip, but kind of what caused that transition from the broom closet, working your way up to move into Hawaii?
Well, sometimes good things happen to you as opposed to by you. And so in this case, I had been developed some mentor-mentee relationships in the agency, and confided in my mentor that I was looking for a bigger, more consumer-oriented advertising experience. And I just filed that with him. He knew that this was my plan. So one day he calls me and says, I have a good friend with a larger agency that is looking for somebody like you. I'd like to connect you with them. And I said, sure, if you think it's a good opportunity, I'll be happy to talk. He says, by the way, it's in Hawaii. And I'm in Pittsburgh at the time, in the winter. So I said, well, I'm intrigued. But, I don't think it's realistic, but I'll be happy to talk with him. And that's really what started it. I had the conversation. We met. I met some of the principals of the agency in New York and then San Francisco. They made me an offer. I said, I can't accept it without seeing it. They said, well, we don't fly people to Hawaii. We've been burned too many times by folks just looking for a free trip. So I said,
And
okay,
there's
well,
probably some truth to that. You're saying, oh, I'll at least entertain it. They'll fly me out. I'll spend a few days in a hotel, make a
exactly.
trip of it. And so I probably get that there would be the opportunity for a bit of abuse there. So go ahead.
Well, so I told them, you know what, I'm serious about this. I will pay my own ticket. I will fly out there for 2 days and we'll make a decision. And I did, and fell in love with it. Great agency, an incredible experience, a boy from the Midwest seeing Hawaii for the first time. And so I said, all right, I'm going to do this. We'll try it for 2 years. I was fairly, I was 25. I'd been married 2 years. And my wife, signed up for it with me, and off we went, and turned out to be a tremendous move. So nothing to lose, everything to gain. An incredible adventure on a personal and a professional basis. I climbed the ranks rapidly, and after about 6 years at the agency, then was recruited by the competitor of my client. I was First Hawaiian Bank was my client. Bank of Hawaii was their rival. They hired me to run their communications department. So I became a client for the first time. It was in that experience that I came up against my ignorance, frankly. My business depth and rigor were now tested because I'm in a bank now. I'm the client. I need to understand what businesses the bank is in, so I can recommend marketing for them. So I started to attend some executive education programs at Cornell. Where was the other one? At UVA, University of Virginia, taught by graduate professors, graduate business professors. It blew my mind. I was turned on now from a communications background. I was really getting exposed to what marketing was all about. That planted the seed in my head that I need to get more education. I need to come up against, back to the numbers that I had avoided in high school and undergrad. And I need to come face to face with that. Now, with a young family, two small boys, 4 and 2, and a wife who had a great career in Hawaii. I had to make it count. I wasn't going to get this education at anything less than the best. And so I fell in love with the concept of Harvard Business School and explored it and said, if I can get in there, that would be the place for me. And so I did. And off we went and relocated from Honolulu to Boston, bought a winter coat, bought a white shirt and a tie, and there we were at Harvard, and turned out to be incredible.
Now, one question just that I may have missed, or that if you did, or my apologies. So you're saying, okay, I need to better understand kind of their products, the number side. My ignorance is finally kind of catching up with me. So you say, okay, took some initial executive classes, decided to kind of go full bore and go to Harvard, get the MBA. Now, that time where was the employer saying, great, we'll pay for it, we'll put your career on hold, or did you do it remotely, or kind of how did, what happened as far as the career side? Because if on the one hand you're saying, hey, I need this knowledge in order to be a better employee and to be able to better service the client, on the other hand you're saying, I'm going to take a break and I won't be around for a while. How did that work with the job you had?
So my knees were knocking and my palms were sweating when I went as the CEO of the bank and said, I've made a big decision. I love it here, this is great, but I want to reinvest in myself. And so I cut the cord. I left a great job in paradise, frankly, uprooted my family, but I just had faith. I had faith that this place, Harvard Business School, getting this MBA would open up avenues for me that I could never even put a toe into if I didn't do that. So we liquidated. I sold my house, packed up the kids, and off we went for this adventure. Just basically on confidence and faith. I knew that I could make the most of it. And this is like burning the boats. There was no turning back. Once I left this, first time I'd ever been unemployed, by choice at least, and I knew that I had to make it count. So if you put enough of a bet on it, you're gonna win, and that's what happened.
Now you say, okay, you take the old Cortez line, burn the ships.
Exactly.
You're there, you're going to do it, and you don't have, you made the decision, and you don't have any choice. So you go
That's
and
right.
do you go get the MBA at Harvard, and certainly a good school, and from the educational perspective, but you still have a bit of that uncertainty. Was it you have burned the ships, you don't have a decision, but you can always say, was it a good decision to burn the ships, or should we have sailed back? That type of a thing, or should I have stayed in Hawaii? So as you're coming out of the getting the MBA, was it a good decision, and kind of what was the next steps from there?
So it turned the reward, the recognition that this was a good decision came to be during the recruiting season when because I was more experienced than most of my classmates, I had a sort of a hybrid profile, and so this appealed to quite a few companies. I had 4 job offers coming out of Harvard. And here's where I got a little bit conservative. I decided to go back to the industry that I had left, financial services. So rather than doing, McKinsey consulting, that sort of thing, I said, all right, I'm going to retrench now where my experience and my profile were the most valuable to the marketplace was in banking. And so I accepted an offer by Citibank and joined them as VP of National Marketing. That's what brought me to Chicago from Boston, was to join Citibank. It was interesting, very political environment, very corporate, a lot of turf, struggles. And I think if I was rethinking my decision to leave Hawaii and get the MBA, it was never really tested at business school, but now it started to be tested when I entered this corporate environment, assessing, is this really for me? Is this really what I did all this for? And so before I could really conclude that, I was recruited by MasterCard, also in Chicago, with a great opportunity, Senior VP of Global Marketing for their debit business. And that was fabulous. I loved it. Now I was being rewarded for having the sacrifice and taken the risk of leaving Hawaii to do that. This was a great job. It was a great job until, as you said, they asked me to relocate. Now they wanted me to move to New York, to Westchester. And my wife and boys were now, more entrenched in Chicago, and I didn't want to do that to them again. You know, we'd been everywhere, we'd done everything. It was time to settle. So that's when the entrepreneurial bug started to get seated in me. And that was my moment of truth.
Now, one question, and that definitely makes sense. Now, the question is, was the entrepreneurial bug is more of, hey, I finally had the opportunity to chase a idea that I've always had, or is it more of, hey, I don't want to move, I don't want to go work for someone else, and so I'm kind of, forced into that box, not in a bad way, because I love entrepreneurship, but was it more of kind of thrust upon you, or did you kind of more seek it out?
Yeah, good question, Devin. It was really a combination of the two. Without being soured on the corporate America experience, I don't think I would have done it. In other words, I'd seen the downside of that. I don't want to badmouth it, but that ran out of excitement for me. My passion was not that anymore. And from the positive standpoint, this MBA education had been so incredibly, empowering for me and invigorating for me, that I felt that there was an arena there where I could build an entrepreneurial venture and speak to my passion and leverage that passion. So that was really it. It was the enough of corporate America, and here's a brand new door that opened that makes my heart beat faster. And that was in the higher education sector. So the crossover between those two was my marketing and strategy background. And I said, I can capitalize on that in this education and development sector and create a business. And so that was the opening to entrepreneurship to me.
No, and that definitely makes sense. Now, as you got into it, we chatted a bit before the show, you had kind of the idea of a mini MBA program, or for those that want to get some of that education, but don't want to do it as a full-time or a part or nighttime student, and, have it a bit more condensed, and I have to have the near amount of expense as well as, time commitment. So that was the original idea. And it sounds like when we talked that, while it may have been a good idea on paper, is one of those that didn't work out in reality, and that one flopped. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. I had everything but customers. Great
Those
concept.
are sometimes just a little bit important.
Very important. But I found that throughout my entrepreneurial journey, it's sometimes the second idea that's the home run. You've got to learn by doing the first one, and that's what I found. So it got me into the marketplace, the education marketplace, but I realized people wanted the real thing. And so fortunately, shortly after graduation, I had been an admissions interviewer for Harvard Business School as an alum. I learned a lot about the process, what they look for, what the pool of applicants is like. And so this was my aha moment. I said, I will guide people in their careers and their educational choices and enhancing their candidacy so that they have more opportunities. And that's what launched my business called the Mba Exchange. That was really the beginning of that hands-on entrepreneurial journey. I grew it from myself on a laptop to about 75 consultants around the world. Over the span of 20 years, we served about 5,000 young people, clients, and just created a business of which I was extremely proud and could justify my 7-day weeks and 18-hour days, and loved every minute of it.
I thought that as soon as you became an entrepreneur, you work, according to television and movies, you work about 1 to 2 hours a week and you get paid millions of dollars. That's not the case. No,
not the case.
Certainly joking on that one, but I think that there is sometimes that disconnect, that just because you're following what you love and doing your own business doesn't mean that you're not going to work a lot of hours, and doesn't always mean that you're going to just have money rain from the sky. Those things may come, and you may be able to get to a point that you can take a little bit of a breather, but that's not going to be the beginning, and it may not ever come. And so you might as well just say, hey, this is what I love and this is what I want to do. So now you're doing that, and you did that for quite a period of time, and grew it. You had quite a few people on the team, or and was expanding it. And then I think, as you mentioned, around 2016, you had one of your employees that came and kind of offered to buy out the business and to take over for you. And is that the case?
Yes, exactly. So this was, I wasn't necessarily looking for an exit at that point, maybe a few years short of that. But I realized that, a service business is not easy to sell sometimes. And the due diligence process of selling a business can be very complex and exhausting and not fruitful. And so this opportunity seemed to me to be the best of both worlds. Someone I knew, liked, and trusted, who knew, liked, and trusted me, would keep the due diligence process more minimal. He knew the business, and I decided to do that. And it allowed me to stay with it. My exit included several years as an advisor and chairman, and this was my baby, and I wasn't quite ready to part company with it. So that turned out to be the way that I did my exit in 2016.
Oh, and that makes sense. And, it is one where service-based businesses are always generally, and as a rule, much harder to sell, because most of it is based on relationships and the
Right.
person that's, the founder and the one that has all the connections and that's been built it over a period of time. And so it's often very hard to transition that to someone else, because as that person leaves that everybody has a relationship with, they no
That's
longer
right.
have that connection, and they tend to look somewhere else. And so definitely sounds like, hey, if we can have someone that's already familiar with the business, already been around for a while, and then otherwise can make a much better transition, sounds like a great opportunity. So now, as you're saying, okay, coming out, sold the business, moved to an advisory role. Now, how did you kind of get into the current things, what you're doing, which is, doing a marketing communications practice? You're also doing entrepreneurship forums and also entrepreneurship camps. And so it doesn't sound like you sold the business and just said, I'm going to take a break and retire, but it sounded like you had a few other things. So how did you kind of transition, or what made you decide to go in that direction?
So I retired for a weekend. That was pretty much it. I had a Saturday and a Sunday, and realized that business is my hobby, my passion, my network. I identify with it, and wanted to do it. I think it probably was that MBA education. Harvard is known for what's called the case study method. And rather than a lot of lectures and textbooks, students are immersed in literally hundreds of case studies, new ones every day. And in the course of a 24-hour period, I was immersed in a business, given some facts, but not complete information, and then forced to make a decision. What are you going to do? So I really got an appetite for this immersion in brand new industries and brand new companies. Framing problems, coming up with hypotheses, testing them, implementing them, tweaking them, and then moving on to the next situation. I found that to be very gratifying for me. So consulting was the way to do that. I'm fascinated by new industries and new companies. And so I tapped into my network that I had built over the years, and had my first couple of clients. And that was really the beginning of it. I haven't had to go out and hunt and gather very much since then. I love doing the work, the trust that's built up with clients, and again, this exposure and this education. So by now I've probably worked in 40 industries, and each one is, the next one is the one that turns me on the most. And so that's what I've been doing is strategy, competitive analysis, stakeholder interviews, branding, this sort of thing. And it's just great. Now, at this chapter of my career, again, being such an evangelist for entrepreneurship, I wanted to give back and pay forward and all those other cliches. And so I did that in a couple of ways. One was forming forums, groups of non-competing entrepreneurs to engage with each other, sort of serve as a personal and professional board of directors. So I've done that. I'm now splitting my time between Chicago and Nashville, and I did that with two groups in Nashville. The other thing that I wanted to do as a dad and now a grandfather was thinking about the next generations of entrepreneurs. And so I had, again, I'm an educator, a mentor, a coach, and I decided that a summer camp for high school kids to study entrepreneurship and really get hands-on would be the way to do it. I assessed that market. I found some programs being offered by colleges that were really sort of thinly veiled recruiting opportunities for them to get high school kids to apply to the school. And I found some very tech-oriented camps that had a narrower window. If I was a high school student thinking about a product or a service business, it really wouldn't relate as much to me. So I recruited a couple of great partners, a title sponsor of Inc. magazine, which is the Bible for entrepreneurs, and a wonderful camp company called Summer Discovery to provide the logistics, and a third nonprofit called the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship to come up with a curriculum and provide certified teachers. So I aggregated them, and now we're launching this summer a program called Inc. Young Entrepreneurs that will be held on 4 college campuses for high school kids. And I'm really excited about it, and that'll start at the end of June.
That's awesome. That sounds like it's a, gratifying way to give back, to continue to participate in a lot of the things that you've been excited about for the last part of your career, all of your career, but even more so dive in the last part of it, and then and also or explore a new opportunity. And I had to laugh when you say, startups are my hobby, because that's usually what I say as well. Usually when people ask, I'll give some other can try things. There are other things I enjoy, but by and large, usually if I have some free time and my mind tends to wander, it ends up wandering back to a new idea or a new startup or something to do with the current businesses I run. So I think that there's definitely that mindset.
Well, I'm thinking that a lot of the entrepreneurs that watch your podcast, they may have kids or neighbors or nieces and nephews in high school age that might be really turned on by this. We all want to pass this on to our kids. One of my sons is an entrepreneur here. And so I think that giving back is very important. It's also exposed me to some other educators in entrepreneurship at the university level. And I have actually 3 CEOs from Shark Tank funded companies that are going to be mentors and judges in our program this summer. So if anyone's interested in learning about it, they can go to www.summerdiscovery.com and they'll see details about it there.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to check that out, and we'll mention that again as we wrap up the podcast. So we'll give people an opportunity to hear that again and find out a little bit more there. But before we dive to that part, and now as we're kind of at the the present day, or kind of where your journey has led to to where you're at today, great time to transition to the 2 questions I always ask at the end of the podcast about your journey. So the first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made, and what'd you learn from it?
I think the worst decision I made was just prior to the entrepreneurship journey, which was taking a job just because you need a job. Financial obligations, the fear of unemployment, those are very powerful forces in anyone's life. They were in mine. And so, at a point where the current job was not what I had in mind, instead of starting that entrepreneurial venture at that point, I delayed it one more stop. And I regret that, because it became stifling and frustrating to be ready to be an entrepreneur, but to not start the effort. So I guess taking a job just to have a job was the worst decision I made. I pulled the cord on that after a year, and then the heavens opened up and I could pursue what I wanted. So take the risk, bet on yourself. Having the marketplace as the variable rather than the politics and myopia of bosses is not as risky as it may sound. And so that was my learning moment in my path.
No, and I think that's a great takeaway, because it's interesting. I think that I think we're now coming up on 400 episodes, and out of all of that, and there's a lot of different answers that people have given, but there's certainly a common theme with a lot of times the biggest mistake people make is not getting started earlier. And it's not that it's not that they necessarily would have been rich beyond their wildest dreams, or even that they would have been more successful or anything else. It's more of, hey, I love this. It was a great passion of mine. I enjoyed it, made a big difference in my life. Now I wish I'd just done that 10 years earlier before I went through all the other things that I thought I had to do in order to get here. So I think that that's a great takeaway for people to be reminded of. Second thing is if you were talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Okay, I was thinking about this, and I'm gonna cheat a little bit and give you 2. One is Bootstrap. It's incredible what you can think of and come up with limited resources. giving away equity, bringing in a partner too soon. I find that these create more problems than they solve. And getting outside funding, borrowing heavily to launch a business, I think is a mistake. Scaling it down to the point that you control it, you don't owe anyone anything, makes you very resourceful and creative. And I think ultimately you'll grow the business faster and bigger that way. So running lean, keep all expenses variable, use contractors, not employees, and delay, in fact, avoid partners if you can. Alliances are better than alliances and contractors are better than partners and employees. Eventually you reach a point where to grow, you've got to do that. And going kicking and screaming into that is a good way to do it. Your decisions will be more precise. You won't have to look back and say, geez, I did that too soon. I gave away too much of the pie. I didn't need to do that. So it would be, bootstrap and scale organically and count on yourself rather than trusting in partners.
No, and I think that there's a lot of truth. Because I think that people oftentimes they get into it and they think, oh, I have to have a partner. I have to, have that, person and that resource in order to be able to grow. And I think you hit on two things. One is, I think for some businesses, you may not want to scale or have to grow beyond a certain size. You may just enjoy being able to run your own thing, make your own decisions, have a good business, good income. And it may not be a good opportunity. You may not want to bring on those partners because it does change the dynamic, and it changes it from, hey, I can have an idea, implement it, do my own things, try it out, or set the business I want to go to. Hey, now I'm accountable to someone. And if that's an investor, now you have to make a return. If that's a partner, you have to have a second person make the decision, which can be good things. They can also leverage a lot of things, but I think that you should go slowly, kind of, you said, kicking and screaming, and see, do you want that person? Do you really need them? And if so, wait until you need to get to that point, and certainly don't bring them on early, because I think that it changes a lot of the dynamic and can cause a lot of issues with the business. So I think that that's definitely
absolutely.
Advice.
The other one that I wanted to just hitchhike on that was start with the website. A lot of people think, well, geez, I need to form my business, structure it, etc. Then I'm going to eventually come up with a website. I find that starting with a website is a great way to do it. Don't launch the website yet, but unless you can craft your value proposition into something tangible, start to make promises, then you figure out how to fulfill those promises. So starting with the website is not a bad way to flesh out a business, rather than starting with a rough business plan. You'll back into the business plan based on how you go to market. So that's a little irreverent, but that would be the other advice that I would have.
No, and I think that there's a lot of things, because when you go through a lot of what you're doing in a website design, if you do a good job. Now, people sometimes just put up pretty pictures and it doesn't really do it. But if you do a good job on a website design, you have to think about, what is your value proposition? What is your pricing? Who are your customers? And it's going to be a lot of the same thing, as you mentioned, almost as doing that business plan. But one, it's a lot of times a lot more fun to have a website that's visible and tangible that you can see. But two, it also tends to move it along and make progress. And so you kind of hit that. A lot of the same things you're doing with the business plan, but you're not having to just sit down and begrudgingly put it on paper and write it out, because you're doing that same exercise. So I think that's a great piece of advice.
Yep.
Well, as we wrap up, if people want to reach out to you, if they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to go to one of your camps, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Sure. So in terms of the camp, again, Young Entrepreneurs. The details there would be at www.summerdiscovery.com. That's our camp partner. As far as myself, my consulting practice, and so on, best way to reach me would be at my website, which is Bauer, BAUER Inc.com. Bauer-Inc.com.
Awesome. I definitely encourage people to check out any or all of the above, as there's a lot of good resources. And, if I was in high school, I wish I could have gone to a camp and did not one that is just trying to get you to go to the school, but as you said, a real camp where you can actually get the experience and try it out and see whether you love it. And I think that's just, it sounds like something pretty exciting. So on a lot of fronts, I think there's a lot of great reasons to connect. Well, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been a fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. Just go to inventiveguest.com and apply to be on the show. A couple more things as a listener, make sure to leave a review, click subscribe, click share, because we want to make sure that everybody finds out about all these awesome journeys. We also want to make sure to help as many entrepreneurs along their path as we can. So go ahead and do all the above if you're able to. And last but not least, you ever need help with patents, trademarks, or anything else with your business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Thank you again, Dan, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you, Devin. I enjoyed it.